Baylan Skoll is a character surrounded by mystery, with fans speculating just how his story will play out. Now brace yourselves, because the clues are there that point to this Order 66 survivor surprising us later on in the show.
I don't understand.
His actions could have a dramatic impact on the impending war.
Nothing can prevent our journey.
We'll start off by looking at the hints within the first 2 episodes of Baylan potentially doing something very unexpected later on. Then we'll get into what effect this could have on the overall story and what will likely become of Baylan come the end of the season. Now, the introduction of Baylan and his apprentice Shin has been very well received by fans. Let's be honest, everyone loves new mysterious villains appearing on screen, but what makes these ones particularly interesting is the fact that it isn't just as clear cut as them being a new Sith master and apprentice duo. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We aren't too sure if these 2 characters are actually dark side, whether their overall intent in the galaxy is to be evil or if they're just following a paycheck. We learned pretty early on in the Ahsoka marketing that Baylan was an Order 66 survivor, and we know this because he actually knew Anakin Skywalker. Now, he does go on to say that everyone in the Order knew Anakin Skywalker. Maybe he was just a popular guy, but it looks like he actually spoke to him himself. Likely they fought alongside each other during the Clone Wars, but we do know that Baylan has actually spoke to Anakin to the extent that he's bigged up his apprentice Ahsoka to him. So Baylan was already aware of who Ahsoka was before the whole situation with Morgan Elsbeth. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of the character of Baylan is the fact that he did survive Order 66. We know the Empire actively hunted not just Jedi, but Force sensitives, beings that weren't trained or part of the Jedi Order, and they either killed them or turned them into Inquisitors, which actually led characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Cal Kestis effectively going underground, suppressing their Force abilities and getting a normal job and living a normal life as a way to stay alive. Where you've got Baylan on the other hand, unless he went into hiding and came out after the Empire fell, which doesn't seem to be the case, he was out there swinging his lightsaber around and utilising his training and Force abilities as a way to make a living. So it's likely, if this was the case, that the Empire did know about him. But it's Baylan's persistence in remaining true to himself and not suppressing his Force powers that led him to becoming a mercenary, which of course then leads him on to meeting Morgan Elsbeth and getting wrapped up in the whole Thrawn situation, and then of course coming up against Ahsoka, which is where we are right now. Baylan made his introduction in probably the best opening to a Star Wars Disney Plus show to date, when he pretended to be a Jedi to board a New Republic prison transport that was transporting Morgan Elsbeth to the New Republic for trial. Now, this is presumably just after that episode in The Mandalorian when Ahsoka faces off against Morgan Elsbeth and Din Djarin gets the Beskar staff. So Baylan boards the prison transport and pretends to be a Jedi. Of course, this isn't something alien to him. He was actually a Jedi himself, and he very much gives off the vibe of your typical Jedi during the prequel trilogy in the way he acts, the way he speaks, and his mannerisms. But this scene itself actually raises a ton of questions about what Baylan's actually doing. His Padawan Shin is wearing a Jedi Padawan braid. Now, this is a tradition of the Jedi Order. But this Padawan braid wasn't just for show, wasn't just to try and sell the illusion that they were Jedi and they were visiting the New Republic on good terms and just wanted to speak to Morgan Elsbeth or gain any information from her, because Shin actually keeps that Padawan braid on after this event. So it leads me to wonder just what type of training is Baylan giving Shin? Is he training her in exactly the same way he was trained as a Jedi? Or is he just cutting out the religious side of it and focusing on the physical side of wielding the lightsaber and utilising the Force? Baylan goes on to rescue Morgan Elsbeth, and we learn that he's being paid handsomely. Now, this was dropped into the show for a very specific reason, which we'll come on to shortly. But a little bit further on in the story, he tries to peer into the Force to see the future, but he mentions the path forwards is clouded. Now, unlike the Jedi, are the Sith or dark side Force users in general able to sense through the darkness? Is this just an ability that the Jedi lacks? Or is the future, if it is clouded by the dark side, off limits to everyone to foresee? Now, regardless on how far into the dark side Baylan and Shin actually are, throughout the first 2 episodes it becomes clear he doesn't treat Shin as we've seen dark side apprentices treated before, such as Dooku, Maul, or Vader under Palpatine, or even Kylo Ren for that matter under Snoke in years to come. He treats her as a typical Jedi Master would treat their Padawan. But another notable point here is throughout the show, if you watch closely, his interactions with and around Morgan Elsbeth, they seem very wary, very unsure of her power, it seems, and her plans to bring Thrawn back. He actually questions them a little bit and questions her abilities, and in his opinion they seem to be vague dreams. Now, with Baylan seemingly not fully on board with Morgan Elsbeth's plans to bring Thrawn back to the galaxy, it looks like he's really just in it for the money and the possibility of earning greater power within the galaxy thanks to Thrawn and the Empire's vast resources. Perhaps it's a case of if he does well with this job, it could set him up for a position of power for life. Now, if we think back just a moment to The Mandalorian Season 3, we learned that many in the galaxy believe the Republic and the Empire are effectively the same thing, just under a different name. And I'm talking your day-to-day folk that go to work, not the rebel heroes or the leaders in governments. And this has also been something that's been shown in the Ahsoka show already. When Ahsoka and Hera visited the shipyard on Corellia, we learnt that there were Imperials at every level of the Republic, and that normal citizens really only had loyalty to whoever was paying them, whether that be the Empire or that be a Republic. At the end of the day, they're going to go back to their same home and they're going to spend the same money, so really their loyalty is just who's going to give them that paycheck. And I don't really think Baylan at this point in time is any different. Let's not forget the Jedi Order has fallen. Right now he is just a normal person out in the galaxy, but they happen to have a lightsaber and they wield the Force. And effectively that's what I think he's training Shin to do. Yes, you get your masters and your apprentices in the context of being a Jedi or a Sith, but you also get apprentices in normal everyday jobs, and this is effectively what this has become for Baylan. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's effectively training Shin to fight like a Jedi, but for money rather than to keep the peace. You'd have to think he has been doing this for a little while to be comfortable enough to bring on an apprentice. Work must be pretty good for him. So just how he got away with operating as a force-wielding mercenary during the Empire's reign is a strange one. And it does bring me back to that question, how did he know Vader was Anakin? No one knew that other than Reva, but she was apparently at the temple during Order 66, and somehow she knew that this person that cut down her and her friends became Darth Vader in the suit, even though she wasn't on Mustafar, as far as we know. Now, the only way I could think this would actually be possible and make some kind of sense is if during that Order 66 moment when Anakin did come face to face with a young Reva, that a clone trooper in the background maybe referred to him as Lord Vader and she overheard it. Now, perhaps something similar did happen to Baylan, but just think of this for a moment. What are chances he would have actually been at the Jedi Temple during Order 66 and when Anakin was there? Let's not forget, he would have been around the same age as Anakin, and even if he was present at the Jedi Temple, he would have been a much greater test for the clones than the younglings were. And he probably would have, looking at how he fights during the Ahsoka show, he probably would have dispatched many clones with relative ease. So it's likely if he was slicing and dicing clones that he would eventually come face to face with Anakin himself. And even if Baylan is a good fighter and is quite powerful in the Force, he wouldn't have been a match for Anakin at this point in time. So I think a lot would have had to have fallen in place for Baylan to know Vader's identity in this way. I do think it is a bit of a reach if that's the route they decide to go down, but the more likely scenario, I believe, is that he was actually hired by the Empire before, perhaps on jobs that the Inquisitors just couldn't do, but they weren't big enough to warrant Vader going out and doing them himself. Or perhaps Vader was out pursuing another Jedi at that point in time. But I do wonder, would Palpatine have allowed Baylan to operate in this way, especially to train a Padawan with Jedi tradition? In fact, there is the possibility that the Empire was aware of Baylan operating independently and actually hunted him. And perhaps he went up against Vader at one point in time, but was strong enough in the Force to sense that this being was actually Anakin Skywalker corrupted by the dark side. And perhaps that's how he knows Marek. Perhaps Marek was once tasked with taking down Baylan, and then the Empire fell and them two became friends because at the end of the day, Marek also needs to now make a living. Again, going back to that theme that's reoccurring during the first two episodes, money seems to talk. At the end of the day, every single person in that galaxy needs some form of income to survive. There's also one more moment in the show that hints at an alternative path that Baylan could take here, where he mentions that it would be a shame to kill Ahsoka as there are so few Jedi left. Now, Morgan at this point calls him sentimental, and it's quite clear that he still holds the Jedi in some regard, but the reality just is that they're gone now and he needs to survive still. Now, if you add this to the fact that he's already showing signs of doubting Morgan Elsbeth's plans, I believe that when he's faced with Ahsoka, the fact that he doesn't just have a hatred for the Jedi like so many Sith do, there's a good chance that he could actually turn around and choose to take the right path over greed and turn his back on the Empire and Thrawn, because Let's not forget he was probably trained in the ways of the Jedi since he was very young, and these are ingrained into his very being. Even Vader, for all the hatred and anger and rage that he had, still turned to the light side in the end. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure if Shin will do the same. I do think it'd be pretty cool if she actually didn't, and she actually disagreed with her master's decision to switch sides, and ultimately ends up killing him. Now, we know this is a common trait with the Sith for an apprentice to try and kill their master, and we know Shin at this point in time isn't a Sith, but she could go down the darker path. Now, very sadly, the actor who portrays Baylan did pass away, and there has been no talk, inside or outside, that I've heard of a recasting of the character of Baylan taking place in any shape or form, so it leads me to think that Baylan doesn't make it out of this season alive in the first place. So with his character displaying Jedi traits and a hesitation to Morgan's plans, how else could Baylan meet his end really in the Ahsoka series? Would he give a glimpse of the light side only to be killed by one of our heroes? I really don't think so. The only way I can see it happening is if he does eventually switch sides and then he's killed by an enemy. So I want to know, do you think Baylan will redeem himself and go back to the light? Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you.